Yeah, I guess for me, this was one of the most sort of interesting parts of the world of Ice and Fire because it includes so much new information, and we never really get to see anything that far east. We'll probably never actually go there in the series. So for me, it was a lot of fun to get a snapshot of that, even if most of it's just kind of wild speculation and rumors.
We have to go east before we can go west, don't we? Or is it the other way around? I forget.
One of the two.
All right.
East to go west. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So we're gonna go east.
Yeah, this is probably the section of the world of Ice and Fire, and the Planetos in general, that people know the least about, and is probably the most exotic and the most mythical. I think once you throw in the factor of a shy, that's when things get really crazy, because this is supposedly where dragons still roam. This is where the ghost grass is from. So there's been a lot of references to different regions of this part of the planet in the story thus far, but they've all been very cryptic and very unclear and vague. So yeah, for me, this is also my favorite part of the book to learn more about.
If you guys remember in the first book, in A Song of Ice and Fire, Dany actually, there's a cool sort of little paragraph that Dany comes across in Vaes Dothrak, where she's witnessing all the various Eastern and Western traders intermingling. Can you guys see that quote I've got on the show notes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the box.
Do one of you guys mind reading that?
Oh, you want to hear a Long Island accent instead of the dulcet Australian tones? That's fine.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Long Island, hey!
Not what
It's huge. Like. It's huge. It's huge.
All right, that's closer. All right.
Yeah.
Dany liked the strangeness of the Eastern market too, with all its queer sights and sounds and smells. She often spent her mornings there, nibbling tree eggs, locust pie, and green noodles, listening to the high, ululating voices of the spell singers, gaping at manticores in silver cages, and immense gray elephants, and the striped black and white horses of the Jugosnai. She enjoyed watching all the people too, dark, solemn Ashai and tall, pale Kartheen, the bright-eyed men of Yiti in monkey-tail hats, warrior maids from Baya Shahabad, Shamiriana, and Kaya Yayana, with iron rings in their nipples and rubies in their cheeks. Even the dour and frightening shadow men who covered their arms and legs and chests with tattoos and hid their faces behind masks. The Eastern market was a place of wonder and magic for Dany, but the Western market smelled of home. It's weird that he named all those places, and I assumed that he hadn't even thought of these until like someone's like, draw a map of the mountains beyond the mountains beyond the mountains. But he named these all the way back in 1996.
Yeah, that's what surprised me. Like, because I kept thinking that all of this was sort of new material that he'd written just for the book, but it's all ingrained in there. We keep just stumbling across it, and it's never really returned to. It's just this kind of weird, vague, mystical place in the Far East. So
it's interesting to see some differences, though. So you can see in that passage. He mentions the striped black and white horses and not the zorses of Jogosnai. So I wonder if that is, represents a very, very slight evolution in the way he was picturing it, or what, maybe in his mind they were zorses, but he didn't want to confuse anyone, so he just called them horses. But you can see how there's slight, subtle differences between the two.
Yeah, I guess from Dany's point of view, she wouldn't maybe know the term horses, so she just describes it as a horse that's black and white.
Maybe because she's with the Dothraki and they only have like a word for horse and not anything else. It's like stripy horse.
Yeah.
And red horse, yeah.
But it's interesting how right at the beginning, even it's positioned as this place of farawayness and otherness, and in comparison to like the sort of familiarity of Westeros.
Well, I think it also, to me, it demonstrates the point of view of a quote unquote Westerner in our own history. If you were from Rome or something like that, and you were, say, at the market of Constantinople, I'm sure you might have seen people from South Asia, from Central Asia, from China, maybe from Japan. And it just would seem totally insane. These are cultures that are, very different. There's a real heterogeneity between them. And to you, it just seems like this super collection of exotic peoples. But really what it is, it just demonstrates the vastness of what counts as quote unquote the Far East and the diversity. It's really not just one certain unique peoples that are there. It's really several different types of civilizations that can be represented and that can influence one another. So, I think he did a good job of capturing that.
Yeah, definitely. And Vaestothrak in particular is really interesting because it's one of those few places where East and West are sort of meeting and intermingling and trading and sharing sort of conversations and negotiations. I guess the other place would be sort of Karth. It's sort of described as the gateway between East and West. But there really isn't a place like that. The Bone Mountains very much divides those two cultures and keeps them isolated.
So what would you say the real world representation would be Vaestothrak? Would that be Karakoram, you think?
Wait, where was the Silk Road? Let's just go to basics.
The Silk Road was it was north of the Himalayas, connecting China to like Pakistan, and basically bypassing India, and then making it eventually through the Middle East into Turkey.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say the biggest city there.
Well, obviously Constantinople, I think. This is something we talked about before. Constantinople, like it in and of itself, it can represent Volantis. It could also represent Karth because it's kind of the gateway between East and West, and that's where trade is always going to have to go through. So just by location alone, they're going to have a lot of wealth and a lot of economic things happening. I think Singapore would be a good port representation of what Karth was back then.
Before we begin, Michael, it says on the doc you have a mandatory preamble about maps and duck source.
Yeah. So this is the reason that we're here today. So in A Dance of Dragons, you may remember that Zaro's and Daxos gives Danny a map, and the map is designed to show Danny to go home, sort of as a hint, here you go, get lost. But what's important about the map is that Karth is depicted as the center of this map, and if it stretches all the way to Westeros, people have extrapolated that there is theoretically an equal amount of stuff to the east of Karth. So when they were making the Lands of Ice and Fire, I think the publishers were like, hey George, so you basically stated that there are people who have put down on maps stuff to the east. Could you show us what all that stuff is? And George was like, oh, okay, let's put some of these names I've come up with down. And he actually reworked his concept of the Far East to what it is today. And you can see that if you go to the 2011 Game of Thrones maps of the whole known world. It's a little bit different to the Lands of Ice and Fire.
Right, the shape is different.
Yeah, and I think the Jade Sea, it was once an inland sea, but now it's an open sea. Mm-hmm. And so then the Worlds of Ice and Fire came, and Elio and Linda were like, hey, George, there's all this stuff to the east with all these weird names. Could you invent some backstory? And so we sat down and invented some backstory. And now we're here, and we're podcasting about it, and it's all because Duck Sauce gave Danny a map in A Dance of Dragons. Isn't that fascinating?
It all comes back to Duck Sauce.
Thank you, Duck Sauce.
Thank you, Duck Sauce.
Thank you, Duck Sauce.
Okay, well, let's get into the main locations and peoples that make up the far east of Essos, starting with the Bone Mountains. So the Bone Mountains are a vast, menacing curtain of stone which stretch from the Jade Sea in the south to the Leviathan Sound in the north, making it the largest mountain range in the known world. It effectively divides the continent of Essos in half, with the Dothraki Sea and the Red Waste lying to its west, and the fabled kingdom of Yeti to the east. Very few Westerosi have journeyed all the way to the Bone Mountains. Even the famous adventurer Lomas Longstride lost heart at the sight of them, surmising that he had at last reached the end of the world. Along with their bleached white exterior, the bones are also named after all of the men, horses, oxen, camel, birds, and giants whose skeletons litter its peaks and valleys. 1,000 roads lead into the mountains, but only 3 lead out. These are the Steel Road, which connects to Vaestothrak, named after all the battles which have been fought over it, the Silk Road, used for trade between east and northwest, and in the far south, the Sand Road, which connects to Karth and is named for its arid climate. One of the few peoples who have migrated through the bones, at least in recent centuries, have been the Dothraki, who originally hailed from the east. So, I guess this is probably one of the more interesting areas that we come across because it's never mentioned in the novels, and yet it's one of the most sort of striking landmarks you can imagine. It just cuts through the entire continent of Essos.
They look really tall in the Lands of Ice and Fire, like when you compare them to the Eyrie or the Vale Mountains.
Yeah, by scale, they're just humongous.
They're nothing. It's like, damn.
Yeah.
I think the first thing I thought of was this is basically the Planetos' Himalayas, right? because that's really the Central Asian mountain range that dwarfs every other mountain range on the planet, and that really separates, Asia from Europe. I think a lot of people would agree.
Yeah, it says that it's 500 leagues long, right? It's like 1,500 miles roughly.
Yeah, north to south, it's like the length of the Dothraki Sea, and more actually, because it also covers the Red Waste. Right. So, yeah.
I don't mean to get too scientific on George here, but one thing I thought was interesting was you can tell that he was trying to follow some general rules of geology when it comes to, how the land should look adjacent to giant mountain ranges. So usually, it's certainly not unusual to find a big swath of desert, because obviously the mountains are preventing the precipitation from getting over there, which would cause that incredible arid area. But usually, then this could just be my own ignorance, but am I wrong in saying that it seems weird that there's a desert on both sides of the mountain range? Because that's what George has on his planet here. Usually it's usually on one side because all the water's on the other, right?
Are you referring to, what is it, the Great Shrinking? No.
Sand Sea?
No, the Great Sand Sea is on the east side of the range, and then the Red Waste is on the west side of the range.
Well, not the whole range, though, because the Dothraki Sea covers most of that side, and that's fairly fertile, isn't it? That's hilly and
I see.
grass drains. It's just the Red Waste, yeah. But then there's the Shrinking Sea on the other side. But it seems to be just one point of that each side, because above the Shrinking Sea and below it seem okay, I think, because you got the Mosobi forests and all that area.
We do know that the Red Waste has come up pretty recently. Because when the Carthene were migrating down, they were hoping to settle there, but then they got moved out because everything got too dry too quickly.
And they stumble across all of those cities filled with skeletons who seem to be in the middle of living, suddenly killed by some kind of drying out or drought.
Or dragons. It was dragons.
Oh, dragons.
I don't know if this gets us too off topic, but there's some interesting parts of the Jade Sea that really doesn't get discussed too much in the Jade Sea portion of the encyclopedia, like the Isle of Vahar, Lesser Marak, Khal, which is just past Karth. All those are the areas that don't even really seem to get mentioned in any portion of the book, right?
Yeah, I think he gives a sentence or two to some of the islands in the Jade Sea, but it's really just there's manticores on this island. This island is where slavers have a headquarters. Great Morak is particularly interesting because it's the largest island in the whole known world, yet it's never really discussed in any length. We don't even know what the people who live there are like.
Right. There's a stone cow there, because Zaro once references the stone cow of Pharos.
And the way he describes Karth as being the gateway to the east and west, he describes it also as the north to the south, as though there's something, there's some kind of civilization on Great Morak.
Yeah.
Great Morak was one of the big things that got changed, I believe, because it initially wasn't an island to make it an inland sea or whatever. So I think maybe he was just I'll just leave this part alone.
Mm.
I wonder if you were a trader and you were sick of paying all the taxes at Karth, if you could just take the Cinnamon Straits instead of the Jade Gates to access the Jade Sea. It would probably be longer, but there's different cities on the way there as well. So I wonder if that would represent perhaps an alternative route, and it would take you past Vahar, Lesser Marak, Port Marak, the Isle of Elephants. So you could theoretically bypass Karth to get to ET if you wanted.
Yeah, you could. It'd just take way longer, and you might need to resupply at some point. You don't want to be left out in the middle of the ocean.
Right.
And the ports might not exist on Great Morak as they do on Karth. But I guess that's right. Returning to the Bone Mountains, again, it does really sort of symbolically and physically separate East and West. It really cuts them off. And you have these sort of great civilizations of East and West in Yeti and, I guess, Valeria, which extends to the Free Cities. And, yeah, they've sort of independently developed, unlike other places where you do have the intermingling. So you have Westerosi, Volantis, Ebonese, and Lannisport, but you don't necessarily have the Yeti in Westeros. So you don't have that sort of free flow of communication. So there's much more a sense of beyond the mountains is this mystical, unreachable sort of dream world.
Yeah, and I think it's in reference very much to the idea of a Shangri-La or, a mystical civilization beyond Tibet or something like that, which from a Eurocentric point of view, certainly appear to exist, because if you think about the diversity and the history of the Far East Asia, and Southeast Asia, that's a lot of different cultures and civilizations that waxed and waned throughout the history of civilization. That I'm sure from the European standpoint, it was just very murky and very vague exactly what was happening. They just knew there was stuff happening, but it wasn't clear what.
And it's described as both sort of horrifying and majestic. So you have these massive golden temples and monasteries that just dwarf anything in Westeros. But you also have the horror of the lizard people and the dark magic in Ashai and Lang and all that. So it just sounds the most fantastical of sort of any place in the known world.
Yeah, and I think some of that actually may be fair, because there's apparently historical references to ancient like whoever the East Asian Marco Polo was. He was like a Chinese sea explorer that would travel with 10,000 ships, as opposed to like the 100 that Marco Polo traveled with. You know what I mean? So it was just like on a much larger scale, and they were kind of famous for mapping out the western Horn of Africa and that whole connection. It's one of those things that I learned through YouTube and John Green and stuff like that. But I wonder if that's kind of in reference to that, because when you start dealing with the Chinese culture and the ancient Indian culture, you can actually get to this really big scale of human civilization, because there's just so many people,
Yeah. Any thoughts on maybe why the Dothraki decided to migrate? Were they in search of fairer fields, or were they escaping some enemy maybe? I don't know.
I can imagine them having like a schism or whatever with the Jogo Snai, because they're very similar.
Yeah.
And they were and the Jogo Snai, as we know from these show notes, are a little bit different. They don't fight each other. So maybe they just had a difference of cultural values. It's like, we want to be bigger assholes and fight each other and do shitty things. And like, okay, you go over the mountains.
Oh, maybe they were kicked out by the Jogo Snai. That's interesting, yeah.
Well, we know that the Dothraki have developed their power relatively recently. It's only been like 300 years or something, right? From reading the Dothraki section. So, and the Jogo Snai, there's mentions of them fighting like the ancient, Yeti emperors going back thousands of years. So I would imagine that something like that might actually be the case. Maybe they just didn't like having their heads binded.
Historically, there certainly was a heterogeneity within the various steppe tribes of Central Asia. So when you go from the Mongolian steppe tribes all the way through the steppe tribes of Eastern Europe, it's not just one peoples. There's actually several different types of steppe horsemen-like civilizations, and I think the spectrum of Jogo Snai to Dothraki is a good representation of that fictionally.
In the mountains, we also hear about something called the Jogwin, or stone giants, which are apparently twice as large as any of the giants in Westeros. They have all disappeared, though their massive stones remained. And I was wondering if this may be a nod to the rock giants in The Hobbit, sort of lobbing rocks at each other.
I have no idea.
Also, just to demonstrate that there were giants across all of the world at one point, but they're just going extinct.
And there was almost like different species of giants, and the giants were sort of derived from the earth, like sort of the earth-given life. Or it could just be like sort of this anthropomorphizing of like landslides or something like that.
Well, no, like if the giants how all humans came from Africa originally, like maybe all giants came from one area of Planetos, and over the thousands of years they developed, the ones in Westeros grew differently than the ones over in Yeti, and these guys were hairier and more, I don't know, through rocks more, I don't know. But they're all common ancestors, but they're speciation. There we go.
I wonder if they're sort of like, the Ents in Lord of the Rings, where they were sort of raised out of the earth by elves. Maybe like the children of the forest raised them.
The Ents were raised by Yavanna. They were not raised by elves. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, Tolkien professor.
I should have known better than to bring a Silmarillion extra.
I'm out. Good night.
What do you guys think about, George obviously makes references to the real life Silk Road through talking about the Steel Road, the Stone Road, and the Sand Road. But it sounds like in the text itself, there actually was a Silk Road, an ancient Silk Road that existed on Planetos that doesn't exist anymore. Do you guys see what I was talking about, or no?
I thought it did still exist.
Then where's the Silk Road now in the Planetos?
Doesn't the silk come from Mir, or one of the free cities? Isn't that they're known for their silk?
No, they're good for processing the silk, I think, and weaving it into tapestries and shit. But like the raw product comes from, I don't know.
Doesn't it? Because the Steel Road connects to Vaos Dothrak. Doesn't the Silk Road branch off from the Steel Road into like the middle part of the bones? Isn't? Hang on, I should open the map.
To the map.
To the map.
So I'm looking at the map right now. The Steel Road is one contiguous road that takes you from Vaos Dothrak all the way to Trader Town, which is in Jogosnai.
Oh, yes. So
there is no
once,
Silk Road.
But that was once the Silk Road? Is that what you're getting at?
What about that dotted road? Oh, no, that goes down to the Stone Road, doesn't it? Okay, never mind.
So in the text itself, it says, the Steel Road, so named for all the battles it has seen, and the Stone Road both originate in Vaos Dothrak, the former running almost due east beneath the highest peaks, the latter curving southeast to join the old Silk Road at the ruins of Yinishar, called Vaos Yini by the Horse Lords, before beginning its climb. So it seems like it was actually the Stone Road that was...
okay, I've said Silk Road. I should have said Stone Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then the Dothraki fucked it up, and they're like, no trade.
What have they got against roads? Oh, no, because it's
they didn't like
cutting
any,
into the earth.
man-made stuff.
Yeah.
My question would be, what's different? If the Stone Road is just the old Silk Road, why don't they just call that the Silk Road? Why do they call that the Stone Road now?
Because there's stones, but there's no more silk. I don't know. Minor differences.
No, I think the Silk Road, there's like a little sort of paler dotted road that goes down to Vaos Yini from Vaos Dothrak. I think that might be the old Silk Road. And the Stone Road just cuts from Cimmeriana to Krasaj Has. So
okay.
Anyway, let's sort of go to the other side of the Bone Mountains. So on the far side of the Bone stand three mighty fortresses. Bear with me. Keaneya, Shemiriana, and Bayasabad. They were originally outposts for the once mighty patrimony of Hirkun, an ancient nation named after the legendary figure of Hirkun the hero, which seems to be another incarnation of the Azor Ahai myth. While the fortresses, which were raised to defend against the wild men of the Bones and the savages beyond, went on to flourish, the patrimony itself withered into dusk as the land dried out. All that remains is a great uninhabited sand sea. The fortresses now extract tolls from those who wish to pass west. They are manned by female mountain warriors, descendants of the great fathers who once ruled the cities. They are skilled in bow, spear, and knife, fight bare-breasted and pierce their nipples with iron rings and cheeks with rubies. Lomas calls them the most fierce fighters on earth. 99 out of every 100 males born in the fortress are gelded and live out their lives as eunuchs, scribes, scholars, cooks, and farmers. Only the most prominent males are permitted to mature and breed. This stems from the society's philosophy that only those who give birth should be permitted to take life at will.
Yeah, definitely some powerful women in the east of Planetos.
To see just a culture, that's just like what's not misogyny, misandry. That's like totally misandric.
Just smash the patriarchy.
Misandronistic.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a matriarchy. That's right.
Matriarchy, yeah. It sounds nicer. But more than that, it seemed to be fostered by the patriarchy because the good fathers taught their daughters to fight and defend the city and go into the mountains and all that. So it's sort of a subversion of what you think.
I imagine it started off as like a eugenics, like the great fathers were like, yeah, only the best of us can breed. But, that means gelding a lot of the guys, and therefore the women are like, why don't we just take control?
Okay, yeah.
That's what I think happened.
I picture like a human version of a honeybee hive, where the vast majority of the productive members are female, and the men are just drones, basically.
Imagine being one of those great fathers. That would be so good. Your one job is just to have sex every night with multiple women to get them pregnant. It also makes me self-conscious to imagine being one of the eunuchs. And like the way that those women must judge the men as they're like being teenagers. It's like only the hottest, the smartest, and the strongest get to keep their dicks. And it's like, I don't like thinking about that.
Yeah.
At least I'll have good books to read.
It doesn't do much for your self-esteem.
No.
Is there any historical allusions you guys can think? I guess the Amazon women from Greek mythology, maybe?
There was a planet that they went to in Star Trek on one episode that was like this, but I can't recall exactly which one.
Yeah, because I think the Amazonians apparently it was completely female and they would teach their daughters to fight, but like once a year they would go to like a male tribe and like just have sex, and they would leave the male sons and take their daughters with them. or they would even,
Right.
capture cities and take the males as sex slaves, basically.
Yeah.
It's sort of have you guys played The Legend of Zelda? Because there's this tribe of people there called the Gerudo, and they're a race of warrior women who live in a desert fortress, and I think they don't geld anyone, but like only one man is born every 100 years. So yeah.
Maybe George was playing.
What is this, like from the original,
Zelda,
like the very first Nintendo game?
No, it's from like the 90s.
Yeah, I only played.
I don't remember that part.
He might have been playing it while he was writing the books. The idea that the city was named after Harkoon shows how each civilization sort of has its own interpretation of the Long Night, which seems to imply that at least at one point a cataclysm did fall, and it didn't just fall in Westeros. It fell all over the world.
Yeah,
in each
that's very
culture.
interesting.
And it's like a common myth, like this warrior myth that was sort of adapted and co-opted by each culture, and they sort of twisted it to their own cultural values.
Yeah, it's almost like
and
we have the flood, but before we got this book, we all assumed that Long Night happened, at least in a couple places, but now we just have the proof that it definitely happened everywhere. And the fact that he doesn't give us exact years is the only kind of frustrating thing, because I always in my head want to narrow it down and say this is when it happened, but we know, with the five forts and with the wall, we know that a lot of shit went down around the same time, but all over this planet. So something very cataclysmic happened.
I think one thing that I'd like to point out is that I don't picture the people from Kaya Naya or Sumeriana as the same ethnicity or the same race as those from ET. So
yeah.
It's not exactly that would be their myth, but I don't know if people from ET would necessarily buy into it in the same way that people of Westeros would buy into Azor Ahai. So it seems like I kind of view these central mountain tribes people as kind of their own thing, and that reference to Azor Ahai was more for these types of people themselves. I don't know if necessarily people in the far east of the Planetos would buy into that same myth, though.
Well, the Yeti have their own one. This is getting into Yeti, but it's like a woman with a monkey's tail, and she was their savior for the people of Yeti. And Azor Ahai is for the people of Ashai.
Well, no, they do mention Azor Ahai when they're talking about Yeti, right? They give all the different names of Harkoon the hero, Azor Ahai, Yntar, Eldrick Shadow Chaser.
Yeah, Yntar. Right. Okay.
Any more to say on the Bone Mountains?
Do you think they have reality TV contests to see who loses their dick? And who's gonna win the swimsuit?
You're strangely hung up on the
this.
eunuchs, Michael.
It's
Don't make me think about it any more than I have to. I just read about it.
Can we try and picture the cultural differences between each one of the forts? So I think he tried to describe the difference between Baya Shabbat and Cimmeriana, whereas Cimmeriana was very much like a mountain type civilization with bridges and things like that, whereas the Sand Road in Baya Shabbat, that was more like a desert type cultural dwelling. I can't remember what he said about the Kaya Naya and how it was perhaps culturally different from the other two. Do you guys remember?
I think it was colder.
That's right. They were wearing these furs, right?
They probably didn't bust their titties out when they were fighting.
Yeah, but I just thought it was interesting to compare the cultures between the three. They're obviously they all serve a similar purpose, but geographically they're in different parts of the planet, so there may be cultural differences from that alone.
Okay, let's move on to Yeti.
Can we move on to the Jogos Nye before we get to Yeti?
Yeah, sure.